We are live. It is the playoff frenzy live on the Hockey News. My name is Andrew McGinnis, Michael Agello alongside. We are going to break down the Washington Capitals overtime victory in game one over the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, guys, this is brought to you by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks? You can go pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com, Stix.com. Michael, welcome in. How are you?
Very good, Andrew. It was a pretty exciting game. I started to lose my voice there after yelling at the screen and getting all into it. But we have a lot to talk about tonight.
A lot to talk about is an understatement here, and we could go on and on and on. We're going to break down all kinds of stuff throughout this game. We're welcome to all kinds of live comments. Of course, we are live across all social platforms, on X, on YouTube, on Instagram. So many places you guys can find us every night here on the Playoff Frenzy Live. But overall, as we approach game one, a huge storyline, of course, besides this being 1 versus 8, was the age difference and the experience factor. Did you notice that right away off the hop in this one?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could see the physicality of the Capitals really come to the forefront very early, with the exception of that combo with Josh Anderson and Brendan Gallagher. Really, Washington had their way with Montreal. I thought that they won the scrum battle, and you could see them grabbing them around the neck, and especially Lane Hudson. I think they were trying to, physically impose themselves on the smaller Montreal players, and I think that worked for the first couple periods. But I think as it got deeper into the game, the speed of the Canadiens sort of revealed itself.
Absolutely, and for the Canadiens, all I saw was people saying on social media, "Where's Jack Guy? Where's Jack Guy? They need him." But of course, there's been a reason why he hasn't been in there. And as someone that follows the team quite closely, Struble has done a good job filling in for that certain spot. So they made the playoffs with Struble in there. Of course, they weren't going to just put in Jack Guy in game one for physicality. But as they said in the intermission across both broadcasts, and as you just said, the physicality battle was clearly won by Washington. And of course, with Montreal being the youngest team ever to ever break in, they got manhandled. I mean, you could see it. Lane Hudson, they were dumping the puck into his corner every single time. When they could body check Caulfield, they were going to do it. And Ovechkin, with how many hits this guy had and all the big players, it's very, very impressive. But I thought that surviving the wave of the first 5 to 10 minutes was key for the Montreal Canadiens. But if we're being honest, if you watch the first 2 periods of that game, you probably didn't see coming what came in the third period.
Well, I wrote an article for the Hockey News about the 2010 battle between the Capitals and the Canadiens, and I started to get that Yaroslav Halak feel from Samuel Montembeault in the first period, because the only reason it wasn't 3-0 after 1 was Montembeault stood on his head. He made a number of unbelievable saves, and I don't think he could really be faulted on the first goal by Ovechkin. So because I think it was David Savard who deflected it, and at least it looked like he either screened it or deflected it, so I can't hold him responsible. But I think if the Habs have any chance at winning this series, Montembeault is going to have to draw on his inner Halak for them to have a chance.
Well, looking at that first goal, of course, the first goal, nobody else but Ovechkin, of course, was going to open up this series. Alexander Ovechkin gets it done on the power play. And funny enough, they kept saying on the broadcast, did that goal style remind you of anything? Well, it looked very similar to a goal he scored just about, a week and a half ago? Low blocker. And you mentioned that David Savard laying down. And of course, he announced his retirement. He said his body kind of just can't really do it anymore. And I told a friend of mine, look, right now, David Savard, he's about a blocking machine, and that's about it. He can't really get up and down the ice anymore. What are your thoughts on a play like that? I mean, of course, you want your defenseman diving at all costs, but do you think that he interfered a little bit and it made it harder for Montembeault? I saw them talking between periods about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the philosophy, if you're going to block the shot, block the shot. If you're not going to block it, let the goalie see it, because 9 times out of 10 he's going to stop the puck. So he sort of did not an ostrich, but he sort of did an Olay type of thing where he laid one leg down. And it's like, okay, and maybe you don't want to be caught out of position. I know it's a power play, but block the shot. If you're going to block it, get in front of it. Put your face in front of it. Block the shot.
And that's just it. I mean, I think when you look at that, they were able to get the job done on the power play early on. And of course, then the second goal scored by Anthony Beauvillier, getting that one, he tips that puck down just almost like perfectly at that shoulder height, right underneath that number where they thought that it wasn't worth a challenge, tips it down to himself, and he puts the puck in the net, making it 2-0 for the Washington Capitals. And I think that you look at the playoffs so far, people think playoffs and they automatically think low scoring. And from a betting perspective, a lot of these games, the odds and totals indicate that this is going to be low scoring. But this is really the first game that we saw where a team got a lead and you thought, you know what, that might be all they need is just 2 goals.
Yeah, through 50 minutes, I mean, Washington really played very tight defensively, and Logan Thompson, I don't think really had been tested. I think up until midway through the third period, I think the Habs had maybe 1 or 2 shots, and then they just poured it on the last 10 minutes in desperation. So I mean, at a certain point, you couldn't maintain that sort of pristine defensive performance. You were eventually going to allow Montreal to get some shots. And as we've seen, guys like Caulfield, guys like Hudson, guys like Suzuki, who I think has ice water in his veins. It's like, I don't know how anybody holds onto the puck like he did on that game-tying goal, because everybody I know and I've seen will shoot the puck automatically at the net. He held onto the puck. He moved in the middle. He waited for the defenseman to go down. He waited for Thompson to be out of position, and then he fired it into the empty net. It was an unbelievable play.
And that's what it's going to take in the playoffs for not just the Canadians, not just for the Capitals, but every team is the big guys to step up, the big guys to be your big players. Of course, depth is very important in the postseason, but that's exactly what we saw was obviously Ovechkin. And then, of course, the star players there for the Canadians. Just take a look at the game recap post-game here. 35-32 being the final shots on goal numbers. As you mentioned, Michael, the Canadians just absolutely flowing the puck to the net every opportunity they could. They realized they were going to have to try and find some greasy goals here. Face-off percentages, the Montreal Canadiens did get the edge with 52-47 there. 50-50 as far as the power play percentages. Penalty minutes were even. Hits 42-33, and that was the big key. And one thing they said on the Canadian broadcast, which kind of stood out to me in a big way, a lot of teams can't maintain and sustain that aggression for a full 60 minutes. So the Washington Capitals bullied the Montreal Canadiens. There's no denying it. But once it got to that third period, the hits kind of went away and they were just playing hockey again. And once the hits went away, it seemed like there was a lot more open ice for the Canadians. But I have to say, looking at the way Ivan Demidov wasn't able to do much in that line with Patrick Kane, looking at Caulfield having to look over his shoulder before he did anything, and Anderson, Dvorak, those guys spending all the time in their own end, it seems like Washington's forecheck is going to be a lot to handle. When a guy like Mangiapane and guys like Duhaime are having that physical presence, they don't have to be goal scorers. They just have to be fierce out there.
And they're getting physicality from their blue line. I mean, you saw Alexiev, who's a big defenseman, who's not, he's pretty much a bottom pairing guy. He's a former first-round pick, but hasn't really bloomed into the defenseman they thought he was going to be. He cross-checks Brendan Gallagher across the face, which I know most players in the NHL would love to do. It was sort of like the Ridley Gregg penalty on John Tavares in the Toronto-Ottawa game yesterday, where where's the call? I mean, Gregg ended up getting a 2-minute minor for cross-checking. I was surprised that Alexiev didn't get at least a double minor. And then later in the game, he gets bloodied by the high stick from, I think it was Jake Evans, and they didn't call. So it was sort of like that sort of balanced it out. It's like, okay, he's lost a couple chiclets. He's off. He's bleeding all over the ice. He's lost, but the situation had it been reversed, well, who knows?
And I think that's the toughest thing for us watching these games. And I think it's tough for the officials too. We have to say, and we'll bring it up here. What do we think of the playoff refereeing so far? I think it's tough for the officials because the officials refereeing game A aren't the same officials refereeing game B. So if you watched the Minnesota and Vegas game last night and you watched the Ottawa and Toronto game, I mean, how were there no penalties really called in that Vegas Minnesota game, but there were so many called in that Leafs and Sens game, right? And again, if Gallagher is John Tavares tonight, is that call made, or is it because it's Brendan Gallagher? Hey, look, this guy's always getting involved in the scrums. It's Brendan Gallagher. So, what are your thoughts so far on the officiating this year, so far in the playoffs, and do you think it's been relatively consistent?
Well, if you ask Travis Green, he thinks it's terrible because he was decrying the whole situation yesterday, where he thought the Leafs were embellishing a bit. I think right now the officiating, they've found a safe haven in calling the double minor or the major so they can have a second chance at video review and look it over. So that almost prevents mistakes. Call the double minor, then we can look at it and we can cover, it's CYA time. And I mean, okay, there's something to that, but really, if you're sharp, you get the call at the first crack, not the second time around. So, I mean, in general, in this particular game, I thought it was fairly fair and even. I'll just say this. I'm watching because I'm in the States, I'm forced to watch the ESPN broadcast. And they shot the chyron at the bottom of the screen just before Ovechkin scored the goal, saying Ovechkin had not scored a goal in overtime in playoff in his entire career. All I could do was flash back to in my youth, watching a St. Louis Cardinals LA Dodgers game where it said Ozzie Smith has not hit a home run in 1,000 some odd at bats against the right-handed pitcher in Game 5 of the NLCS against the Dodgers, and he cranks the ball out of the park. I absolutely hate when these broadcasts will put these things. This has never happened, and then wow, it just happens. What a shock.
It's clockwork. It is absolutely clockwork. I do play-by-play commentary for university sports, and I do volleyball. And I will say this player has not missed a serve all game so far. And then just right there, they missed that serve right away. But it's a packed house right now. Thank you to all of you with us right now watching the Playoff Frenzy live. We are going to be live every single night, breaking down these games, talking post-game here on the Hockey News social networks. And if you can't catch us on Facebook, you can catch us on X. If you can't catch us on X, we're on Instagram. We're on all kinds of networks. So just to keep going over that game recap, of course, goal one, Ovechkin assisted by Wilson and Strome. Beauvillier assisted by Ovechkin and Strome. And I think Strome is one of the more underrated players this season. Doesn't get a lot of credit, but he's getting there. Caulfield by Laine and Hudson. Suzuki, Carrier and Hudson. Ovechkin, Beauvillier, and Strome. So a 3-point night for Strome. Ovechkin does what he does. Hudson, despite all the physicality in this game, he gets an assist on the Cole Caulfield goal, an assist on the Nick Suzuki goal. And I have to say, I'm obviously a follower of the Canadiens, but when I look at that game, it was very tough because 2-0 games can sometimes feel like a 4-0 game. And that's what it felt like. It felt a little bit like a 4-0 game. So in my head, I'm thinking to myself, well, it's only 2-0. But with the physicality and the way things were going, it felt like it was a lot bigger. So they come back, they force overtime. And as what happens a lot in the playoffs is it's either a quick goal after the break or it's like 18th minute they end up scoring. So my question to you, Michael, is this, and I feel like everybody has a different opinion on this. Can the Montreal Canadiens take momentum from that by being a different team in the third period, or is it still a little bit deflating for the fact that, hey, for about 45, 50 minutes, you were certainly not the better team?
I think they can take momentum from the fact that they were completely out of it and they had not really generated much offense for, 5/6 of the game. And then they still were able to tie the game, force overtime, and against the team that, most people don't think they have a chance against. Now, I think they have a puncher's chance because I think all the pressure is on Washington, and none of the pressure is on Montreal. Strangely enough, Montreal is in the same position that Washington was last year. Now, Washington got swept by the Rangers, but the Canadiens are this year's Capitals. They snuck in at game 82. And, they're playing with house money. It's like, okay, let's just go out there. And in the last 10 minutes of the third period, Lane Hudson showed his creativity. And as I said, Cole Caulfield, who's, I think the best scorer and should be the best scorer on the Habs and should be on the U.S. Olympic team in Milano Cortina next February. He scores to get them close. And it was only by happenstance that it happened because Pierre-Luc Dubois accidentally trips Alexander Carrier, and they take advantage of the power play. And then all of a sudden you're up 2-0. And then there's that unlucky penalty. And now it's 2-1, and one bad play, could cost you the game. And it almost did, because Suzuki tied the game. And then who knows what happens in overtime.
All right, we'll get back to some more post-game stuff, but who is Canada's best chance to win? We got some questions coming in, and we got to answer them. Who is Canada's best chance to win the Stanley Cup? No pressure at all, Michael, with this answer, but what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, I'll just say not Edmonton.
Okay.
I'll pick one. I'll pick one in the West, one in the East, based on the first weekend of the playoffs. I mean, Winnipeg is up 2-0. They bounced back in game one, and they're playing shorthanded without Velarde, without Ehlers, but they're up 2-0 going back to St. Louis. Now all the pressure is on St. Louis, and I don't know if anybody really thought St. Louis had a big chance of winning that series, but Winnipeg is going to be challenged because they're going to face the winner of that 2-3 corridor of death, which I always refer to as the second, third. I absolutely can't stand the NHL structure of the playoffs. It should be 1-8. It should not be in interdivision. But they're going to have to face the winner of Dallas, Colorado. In the East, I mean, the commenter here, after game one, the Leafs look fantastic, but we know the thing that the Maple Leafs have perfected is the art of choking. So, can they beat the Sens? They should. They're the better team on paper, but will they? I predicted the Senators in 7, because until the Leafs win, I won't believe that they'll win.
I thought that it was very key, and I said on the cheat sheet here on the Hockey News that it was so key for the Maple Leafs to win the division. It was so key for them to not have to play one of those teams from the Sunshine State in round one. Not that the Battle of Ontario was going to be easy. I just thought it would be nice for them to avoid one of those teams in round one. Michael, all I heard from people was St. Louis is coming in so hot. St. Louis has been in playoff mode. They are ready. They're going to shock Winnipeg. And you mentioned about Velarde. You talk about Nikolai Ehlers. This Winnipeg team seems to be a little bit different this year. And I think that they have changed their approach a little bit, that they're not going to be that team that gets a 1-goal lead and, to quote what soccer coaches would say, park the bus. They're not going to do that this year. I don't think they're going to sit back and protect leads anymore. I think they're a little bit different, and I think they have the offensive firepower. They have the offensive depth, and of course, they have Hellebuck. And I thought personally that Hellebuck didn't have a great game one. Excuse me. And I thought that when you look at them playing that way and scoring that number of goals with him not having a great game one, I figured they were going to win game two. And when you look at this Winnipeg team, if sometimes all it takes is a very strong round one, you get out, you get that confidence in yourself. And once Hellebuck advances to a round two, advances to a conference final, then what can elite goaltender like that do for you? I think it's really exciting to see. So I think Winnipeg would probably be my pick, but I'll tell you what, and it pains me to say this as a Canadiens guy, this Maple Leafs team is constructed the best I think they've been constructed over the past several years. And I think everybody has their role. And one thing I like on certain teams is for each player to know exactly who they are and what they bring to the table. You can't have a fourth liner that wakes up that day and say, I want to be on the top line today. And I don't think the Maple Leafs have that anymore. They have every single player on that team that knows exactly what they're responsible for when they're on the ice. You know, a guy like Steven Lorentz, I think, is a very good pickup for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I think everybody really played their role well in game one. But as you stated, Michael, it's only game one.
Well, I referred a lot of the experts, the Monday morning quarterbacks out there, said that Kevin Cheveldayoff didn't do enough at the deadline. And if you look at the two additions that he made, Brandon Tanev in the deal with Seattle and Luke Shen in the, sort of deal with Nashville, but he went through Pittsburgh, he added physicality and experience. And I think that team needed an extra piece or two. Now they're very balanced. They're very physical. They do miss Velarde and Ehlers, which puts more pressure on Scheifele and Kyle Connor to score. But they're scoring. I mean, Connor scored the winning goal in I believe in both games. I know he scored the winning goal tonight. So, I think that was the difference with them. And with the Leafs, I covered the Leafs with a different website for a number of years, and I've been saying for about a decade, they're not going to win unless they get a couple right-hand shot defensemen who can counterbalance some of their offensive defensemen like Morgan Riley. They go out and they trade for Brandon Carlo. They go sign Chris Tanev in the offseason. They had Jake McCabe a couple years ago. Now they have Oliver Ekman-Larsson, one of the best defensemen of the last decade, on the bottom pairing like the Florida Panthers did. And finally, their core group, which has not shown up in the playoffs, either by injury or just by not coming up big when it needed to. They scored combined 9 points in game one. Now, can they do that through games 2 through whatever against Ottawa? I don't know. If they win the series, I think more than likely they will have done that. And you were right. They needed badly to avoid Tampa or Florida. They need to sit back with a hot toddy watching Florida and Tampa beat the crap out of each other, which they will in a 7-game series. And then that one of those teams limps into Scotiabank Arena if the Leafs beat the Senators, then they actually have a chance to advance further into the playoffs.
Very, very well said. I couldn't agree more with everything you said there. And I think that, again, it's only early, and the old adage people say a series, isn't really going until a team loses at home, and that can be said for both of those series. So going back to the Jets and the Blues here, looking at what they've done, as I mentioned, this year they've proven that they can win in both high-scoring fashion and low-scoring fashion. Of course, tonight's game being a low-scoring victory in game one. If you would have told me that the score after the first period of game one was 2-2, I wouldn't have believed you, especially after the early start of the first period of the Colorado-Dallas game being no score. I mean, it was, a changed world. I think that when you look at this Blues team, they're being suffocated a bit by the Jets. How do the Blues respond at home?
Well, they're going to have to get, I think, better goaltending. I mean, not to say that Binnington has been bad, but in game one, they had a lead. They couldn't hold it. At the beginning of the game, I thought, I was calling him Four Nations Connor in reference to Connor Hellebuyck, because in a one-on-one battle with Jordan Binnington in the Four Nations, he was mortal when he's been superhuman throughout the year. He's going to win the Vezina. He could win the Hart. The Team USA needed him to play at that level, and the Winnipeg Jets needed him to play at that level. And in game one, he let in 3 goals on 17 shots. He was much better in this game. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe it was a little fatigue because he played over 60 games, which I question, but their backup is Eric Comrie, so you want to play him as little as possible. I've seen that from him playing with Buffalo for a few years. But game two, they were a much more settled team. They get the goal from Scheifele in the first period to take the lead. Snuggerud ties up the game, and then Kyle Connor scores on the doorstep the game winner in the third. So, I mean, they're in the position that most people expected them to be in. They're leading a team that was one of the wild cards, 2-0 going back to St. Louis. if they split in St. Louis, go back 3-1 back to Winnipeg, I think most people think they're going to close out the series. But they have the whip hand right now, and they're the better of the two teams, and they're playing like it.
I think the last change is just so apparent as for these wild card matchups. You can just see the matchups are a little bit tough to come by, and we saw that tonight in the Montreal game, and we're seeing it in that Winnipeg and St. Louis series. So I'm curious to see what St. Louis can be like when they get to deploy the players of their choosing, of their choice, because looking at Robert Thomas, the way he played since the Four Nations, you brought up the Four Nations, since he played post Four Nations, I mean, he was at the top. He was doing everything, game-winning goals, assists, goals, 200-foot hockey. But you take him out of the game. You take Buchnevich out of the game. You got Shen, Kyrou, Neighbors. That second line has to be key. And I think for these wildcard teams, it can't always just be your top line. Even for the Montreal Canadiens tonight, sure, Caulfield scored, sure, Suzuki scored, but I was very frustrated with a guy like Patrick Laine tonight for the Montreal Canadiens, and Demidov is someone that's coming in here only playing 2 games, and how is he supposed to maintain possession of the puck if they're losing the puck or they're icing it or they're playing defense? So I think for both of these wildcard teams, but especially the Jets or the Blues heading back home, the second line is crucial.
I mean, starting with Montreal, I think it's a little unfair to expect Demidov. I mean, I was in Toronto on the Saturday when he, came into town, and there were more media there for the 4 players during the morning skate for the Montreal Canadiens and for the Leafs holding an actual morning skate. And people waiting at the airport. I mean, I get it, and his first period against Chicago was a dream, but he's 19 years old. He played in the Gagarin Cup playoffs for SKA St. Petersburg. This is too much too fast. And I mean, maybe at home you can spot him. You can play him protected minutes. You can play him on the second power play. But playing him on the road and being in a situation where you could expose yourself to a goal, and that could be the difference in the game, like it was tonight. Not that it was his responsibility, but it's just not fair to him. Now, the player that I think, Laine is always been challenged defensively. He's just never going to be a good defensive player. He's an unbelievable offensive talent. The player that I was a little disappointed in was Slavkovsky. I mean, other than passing up the puck on the Caulfield goal, he didn't make a good decision, and he wasn't really present in this game. And if they have any chance, they need Slavkovsky to play like he has played at times, like the former number 1 pick he is.
The unfortunate thing about Slavkovsky is he's one guy or he's the other, and there's nowhere in between. And I think sometimes players need to have at least a rock steady in between, because he is either a guy that's moving his feet, forechecking, getting in, being physical, or he is hesitant, not making the right decisions, and quite frankly, holding back his line. And it's Suzuki, it's Caulfield, and nobody next to him. So it's a good point. A lot of Habs fans are saying, hey, put Demidov up there. And I get what you're saying. And it seems like you really don't want to rush him into it. But from where I stand, I look at these lines: Caulfield, Suzuki, Slavkovsky, Laine, Newhook, Demidov, Anderson, Dvorak, Gallagher, and you got Heineman, Evans, Armia. There's nobody that they want to break up. That's the problem. Like, they like their bottom 6. They like the Dvorak line. They like the Evans line. And that Suzuki line's been together forever. So unfortunately for Demidov, he's got Laine and he's got Newhook, but the guy needs possession. He needs to hold on to the puck. And his game is not Newhook dump the puck in and then Demidov go get it. That's not how he's going to play. But that's my opinion. I would love to see him go out there and get possession a little bit. When you play with a guy like Laine, I mean, I truly believe the way it looks right now, Demidov could skate up and down the ice twice before Laine gets up there once. And that's not really a good thing if you're playing on the same line as that player. Stars up 2-1 and the LA Kings up 2-0 to start things off against the Edmonton Oilers. And quite shocking, because it feels like these teams have played each other in the playoffs before.
Oh, gee, I couldn't remember last time. Oh, that's right. It was last year and the year before that and the year before that. Again, this is the imperfection of the current NHL playoff system. I thought it was important for the Kings to get home ice advantage in that series. You have Draisaitl playing at less than 100%. You have McDavid probably playing at less than 100%. They're going to tough it out. You have Darnell Nurse, who should have been suspended for that cross-check to Quentin Byfield's neck, and Ekholm, who is their best defenseman overall, not available. I mean, anybody who can read the room probably thinks that LA has a distinct advantage to win this series. And at home, Darcy Kemper, I think the Kings have only lost 5 games during the regular season at home. So they have the advantage. Now, they're going to have to take advantage of the home ice advantage. They're going to have to go up 2-0 in that series going back to Edmonton, because I think Edmonton is, spending has room rent-free in the LA Kings head. The LA Kings need to slay that dragon like the Maple Leafs need to slay the Boston Bruins dragon. Until they do it, it's going to still be there. But if this is the most vulnerable the Edmonton Oilers have been in the last few years, and I picked the Kings in that series.
I picked them as well, slight underdogs in that series. And looking at the way that they came into it, I just think that this year, more than any other year than the past couple of years, it's kind of feels like 4 or 5 years ago, Michael, where you give me Leon, you give me Connor, and who else are you giving me? And I'm not trying to be hard on the Oilers' depth, but at the end of the day, when I look at Byfield, Deneau being second, third line centers, and then you got Kopitar as the first line center, that's unbelievable. Throw in Kempe, throw in Fiala, throw in Kuzmenko. When you talk about options, the LA Kings currently have more options. This team over here might have 2 of the best players in the whole entire world. But when you talk about 4 lines, I'll pick the LA Kings, and I think it was very important for them to get home ice. Your quick thoughts on that Dallas and Avalanche series before we close things out here. I mean, how crucial is it for Dallas to tie up this series here?
I think it's imperative. The Avalanche dominated game 1. I mean, they need Jake Ottinger to play a lot better than he did. But they're behind the 8 ball. Heiskanen is skating, but even if he comes back, he's not going to be 100%. They lost Jason Robertson. He's not going to play in the series. And the specter of Gabriel Landeskog and that phenomenal story. I mean, somebody in the chat was asking whether he's going to play game 3. I would think that him taking the pregame skate was the precursor of him getting back in the lineup for game 3 when they have the last change. They're going to spoon feed minutes with him. I mean, he's coming back after not playing for 3 years. He's played 2 AHL games. Again, he's an experienced guy and, a leader on that team, but it's unfair to him to expect him to step right in and be the Gabriel Landeskog that we last saw carrying the Stanley Cup around 3 years ago.
I was curious to see if we'd see him make his first appearance in 3 years on the road or at home, and it sounds like it will be at home. Should be a great one. Should be a great rest of the night of hockey. And once again, guys, Alexander Ovechkin, the game winner in game 1. Washington Capitals take it 3-2 over the Montreal Canadiens. An absolute pleasure to work with you. Michael Agello, Andrew McGinnis. This show is sponsored by Stix.com. That is Stix.com. And we are live across all platforms at the Hockey News, the Playoff Frenzy live every single night. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.